We're here today to share the stories of our Collegiate Mental Health Innovation Council members. CMHIC is dedicated to finding and highlighting student leaders who filled gaps in traditional supports and services on their campus. Stay tuned to hear their stories and their programs in their own words.
Hi everybody, I'm here today with Chloe Camp, a member of CMHIC this past year, and she's a mental health advocate at Emory University going into her fourth year of school. And we'll talk a little bit about her transition to nursing in the context of all of the other really cool stuff that she's done and is doing. And the major program that we've talked about in her time on the council is Emory Dark Arts. So she's the president. And Emory Dark Arts is an advocacy group dedicated to destigmatizing mental illness through art, performance, and personal narrative. She's also done work as a social justice coordinator for Volunteer Emory, where she's created programs for folks doing social advocacy, including a series on preventing burnout for folks working in social justice. She's done a lot of work with campus stakeholders, from the counseling center to residence life, and also is a member of Emory's Issues Troupe, a theater program that highlights lived experience, where she's talked about her own experience with mental health and eating disorders. So after a wonderful introduction of all the really cool stuff that you've done, Chloe, I want to turn it over to you and for you to open it up and share a little bit about your personal story and how you got started and what you're doing, and then we can explore some of the cool artwork and how you've managed to take your advocacy into all of the things that you do.
Definitely. Yeah, so mental health has always been something that's been really important to me, even before I really had words to articulate that. From a very young age, I suffered from what I would now call depression and anxiety. And I did have struggle with an eating disorder in high school as well. But as I was kind of going through those major mental health struggles, as a teenager, there was no real language for me to talk about it. And I knew I was lucky enough to receive treatment, and so I had diagnoses and I had therapists who I could talk to, but there were none of my peers were talking about any of their mental health struggles. I certainly wasn't bringing it up with anybody around me. And so it wasn't until I graduated high school that I started to become more vocal about my mental health struggles. And it was during that time that I make a post on Facebook or something like that. And all of these students from my high school would comment and message me and share that they had experienced similar things. And I think I just realized that we had all been silently suffering next to each other with no idea that anybody else was going through what we were experiencing. And so it was kind of that, with a combination of coming to college and meeting more students who were talking about mental health, that I realized that it was something that I was really passionate about destigmatizing and also just opening up dialogue about. And then, as you mentioned, Dark Arts does a lot of mental health advocacy through art, and art has also played a huge role in my development and growth as a person. I grew up dancing and doing theater, and continue to do those things. And the thing about art that's always really spoken to me is the ability to just express yourself in whatever way you feel most comfortable. And so it's just been a huge blessing to be able to combine those two passions into something that I would like to think helps other people. So, yeah.
That's awesome. That's definitely a common thread that I hear from folks, is that I started talking about it and found out everybody else was silently struggling around me, and we were all assuming that we were by ourselves, and it just took some Facebook posts, some Instagram posts, to really open up the conversation and start building a community that was already around you that maybe you didn't know was there.
Right.
And I love the focus on having art as a way to express things. You talked about not having words. I definitely identify with knowing something felt painful and wrong, but not being able to articulate it. And I think that art is such an awesome way for people to express whatever ideas or words or visuals or anything that helps them communicate in a way that they either might not have been exposed to, or a lot of times the diagnostic language doesn't feel descriptive of what the pain or struggle or anything of the experience is like. So do you mind telling a little bit more about some of the things that you've seen through the Dark Arts program, and maybe how it got started and why you all chose? I love the name. I think it's really cool. Think of like Harry Potter or something like really funky. So yeah, if you can talk about just the story of the group and then some of the cool things that you've seen so far.
Definitely, yeah. So so Dark Arts was already in existence. I came to Emory its founding year. So I was I was not the creator, but I was one of kind of the founding members, if you will, kind of the core group that got it started. But basically it began because students like myself realized that there wasn't really, there were spaces at Emory to talk about mental health, but a lot of those spaces hadn't really done, or hadn't branched into the realm of kind of destigmatizing mental health to the extent that we wanted it to be. And one of the things we really wanted to challenge was this idea that we could only talk about mental health in a positive context. Mental health was being talked about in the sense that I used to struggle with this, and now I'm better, and XYZ, meditation, yoga, and positive psychology helps me through it. And that's a lot of people's stories, and that's amazing, and that absolutely should be talked about. But what we noticed was that there were all these other narratives that were very real to people that weren't being shared to the same extent, or even sometimes suppressed. Sometimes that's we don't want to talk about the hard stuff. We don't want to know that you're still suicidal. We don't want to know that you still have an eating disorder, and we definitely don't want to hear that these things that are supposed to work aren't working for you. And so I think one of our main focuses has been kind of we don't want people to feel like they have to sanitize their stories. And so that's kind of been the focus and a huge theme that's run through our different productions. And so it got started kind of under that, that was the motivation behind it. And then art, and the name Dark Arts comes from, obviously the Harry Potter reference, which we love, but, but more so, it's kind of dark. We wanted to kind of, if you will, bring light to darkness. The darkness being those stories that are not as pretty, don't have a neat little bow around them. The ones that are still in the works, and even giving people who are still in really dark spaces a place to exist without having to feel like they have to lie about how they're doing at any given moment. Mm-hmm. And in the art component, as we've discussed, art, art for me, is an outlet, can really be any creative outlet. And that's another thing we really try not to limit. Pretty much we say anybody's an artist. If you want to express your story, that is art. And so we have everything from visual art to people just getting up on stage and just kind of telling their stories. And we do that through our different, and we have a biannual showcase, one art showcase every semester. That's kind of our biggest event, and then we have a lot of other kind of smaller series that we also do, photo projects and all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, so there's one piece that I want to go back to that you mentioned earlier, the sanitizing your stories piece.
Yeah.
I think it's such an interesting tension between having all of the narrative that you hear about mental health being people don't get better, there's people over here that are sick, and then there's everybody else. Mm-hmm. So we need stories of hope, but at the same time, I think from a public perspective, or even from an advocacy perspective, I think there's pressure, I can't talk about my story unless I'm in the perfect place. Mm-hmm. Or if I start talking about my story, now it's kind of a performance, and I can't share the hard stuff that's still happening. And I think that there is this really weird tension of how are we honest but not, what's the word I'm looking for? Deterministic. How are we able to support people and more honestly navigating what this is really like? I can think for myself, from a sexual trauma perspective, the stories that I hear a lot of times are somebody experienced a horrific event and then they talk about their recovery, But for a lot of people with sexual trauma, you have some early on, and then you get re-traumatized, and it happens. And I think when you have a story that feels messy or that you can't identify with, you know, the kind of recovery stories that you usually hear, it can feel silencing, but it can also feel like further, like, oh, there's something super wrong with me because I can't bow my story. Like, and maybe, I think maybe a lot of people are bowing their stories because they feel like that's the best way to tell it too. But yeah, I don't know if you relate to some of that or you see that reflected in the folks that you've talked to.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's definitely this feeling that because like the pervasive narrative is one that has like a nice like complete beginning and end, and the ending is of and now I'm all better. Yeah, like we talk about this all the time in Dark Arts. We also have like weekly meetings where we discuss these kinds of things, and over and over people talk about like how like that narrative doesn't work for me. Like I've had depression since high school and I still have depression, and sometimes it's gotten better and sometimes it's gotten really bad, and you know, what do you do with that? And I think that and for my own self, like, you know, like I consider myself like recovered, but there's still like times where I still struggle with all of the same things, and you know, maybe it's for shorter periods of time, maybe it's not as intense, but it's still present, it's still a part of my life. And I think that can be difficult for people to hear, because I think that there's also sometimes a desire to want to like believe that like this is going to someday completely go away. And I think that my personal philosophy on addressing that is to just tell the truth. Like I think that if you believe in the truth enough, like it is true that people do recover completely. It is true that, you know, some people like have an eating disorder and then like, you know, are able 5 years later to never really like to completely change their perspective and never really struggle with that stuff. Again, it's also true that that doesn't happen for everybody. And so I think that the more that we are honest about our stories, and that's kind of something that we talk about a lot too, because art has this, like, there's a danger there to potentially romanticize our stories, you know, and to even romanticize the struggle of being like, well, you know, like kind of the, like, I'm still sick, and somehow glorify that. And so, you know, I think that being responsible is really important with stories and with art, and just like being honest, I think is the best way to address that.
Yeah. How have you all confronted that romanticization piece? Because I hear there's so many, now that I think there's increasing conversations about mental health, there's kind of you sanitize your story, you're the good person who did all the treatment stuff right, and now you're better story. There's the crowd that's like, don't take our language and apply it to your experience because you don't get it. And then there's everybody identifies with mental illness now, and you're making it seem like it's this like deep, dark, like beautiful artistic thing, when a lot of times it's just like, I didn't get off the floor for 3 days, like this is really hard.
Right. This is hard. Yeah.
So yeah, can you talk about how you have confronted that, and because I think too there's still the like letting people be honest about their experience is hard to hold space for everything, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah, so like you're right, there's so many different, it's funny, like the community oftentimes will divide in on itself, you know, and like, you know, we like to criticize other people, the ways that other people are telling their stories, and I think that, like I said, I think it's important to be responsible and to expect other people to be responsible. At the same time, I think it's a lot more helpful to, you know, to be constructive and like work together on these things. But yeah, like as far as romanticizing goes, like the way that we address that is just by being really upfront about it and talking about it. You know, I think that it becomes dangerous. Like even the name Dark Arts, right? Like as a mental health group, like could be perceived as kind of romanticizing it, right? Like the like dark, and we have a meme, like a group chat that's called Dark and Artsy. We like kind of like making fun of the whole thing, you know. And so, anyways, I think that it's just really important to like address, like you know, we address it at our events, we address it in our meetings, we address it, you know, every chance we get that, you know, we say like there's nothing beautiful. I mean, there can be beauty in struggles, but struggles are not beautiful. It's kind of like the way that I look at it. You know, I think that you can find hope and light you know, in everything. But like, there's nothing fun about having depression. There's nothing fun about having an eating disorder or anxiety or any of these things. And so, and I think it gets back to the honesty piece, you know, like you're probably, like I certainly would not be, there's a way that I could tell my story that's like, yes, and I lost so many pounds and felt X, Y, Z and like whatever. And it's like, but that's just not the truth. Like the truth was I felt terrible all the time and had no self-esteem. Like that's, and you know, and that's the reality of it. And so I think that if you're being honest about it, and that includes being honest with yourself, you know, because I think sometimes like even, you know, like if you've been through a major depression, like I found myself like even thinking, I don't know, like it's easy to get into a space where you're like, oh, well, that wasn't so bad, or like at least like I could like create better art. And it's like, is that actually true? Like, you know, like maybe it was different, but was it actually better? And if it was it worth it? No. So I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it did. I think that's definitely something that I've experienced and hear people experience about recovery is like, especially with eating disorders, it definitely was functionally useful for me, right? It helped me like avoid pain in certain ways, even though it created bigger long-term problems. Like it wasn't a sustainable way to deal with pain, but like it was how I did it at the time. And it's easy to look back and not remember all of the horrible stuff that comes along with it too. So I think that you can see it from other people and you can kind of do it to yourself as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right with eating disorders, especially like, and any kind of like unhealthy coping mechanism. You know, it's still a coping mechanism. Like it does serve a function. It's just that it has that tricky way of convincing you that like somehow it's going to like help you like long term, or like this is the right thing to do or whatever, and then it just like absolutely destroys you. And then
yes. They're usually long term wasn't the best strategy.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So the other piece that came up that I was thinking about in terms of having really honest conversations of what everything looks like is concerns from administrators.
Yeah.
About public conversations where you're talking about self-harm or suicide or any of those things in a way that's not education. Can you speak about that? Yeah,
that's a huge barrier. And that it's a barrier, like especially at the beginning, like when I was a first year and the group was just getting started, right? Like it was very new to have these kind of very honest, like desanitized conversations. And there was a lot of pushback. There was a lot of worry from, you know, counseling and psychological services, from our student intervention services. You know, there was a lot of just concern that we were not actually doing good, but potentially triggering people, you know, and making things worse. And I think there's validity to that. I mean, it's certainly true that people can be triggered by these conversations and things like that. But I think that we get into a dangerous space when we start using, you know, potentially triggering people as an excuse to not have these conversations, or to silence people and have them not share their stories. And so in dealing with administration around that, the way that I found to be most effective in kind of addressing that is actually looping them in. So for example, like what we've started doing is like we'll invite counselors, like we'll invite people from CAS, counseling and psychological services, like to our showcases, and even like invite them to like say something at the end, you know, to kind of like promote, if you will, like the services that they offer and, you know, the different things that they want to be there to support students. And, you know, we're very lucky. I'm sure that, you know, that might not be the case at every school, you know, certainly. But we've been lucky enough that usually there's at least, if not the whole department, which often it's not, like at least like, you know, there's a few people who really believe in what we're doing and want to be there and help. So that's kind of been, I think, the most helpful thing, because then it doesn't feel like an us versus them thing. It feels more like a, you know, like this is our perspective. This is what we've found to be really helpful. We'd like you to be a part of it in this way.
Yeah. What did the start of those conversations look like? Because I think that that's where a lot of advocacy, I think, shies away from this stuff. So it's either the public education about like identifying signs and what recovery looks like, and then sometimes like closed off peer support one-on-one or like group conversations. But this stuff in this setting, how did you approach the counseling center, and what did it look like at the start?
Yeah. So at first, I think where we went wrong a little bit, or like where we got into, maybe not went wrong, but where we got into a little bit of trouble was we just kind of didn't ask at first. Like we just kind of started doing stuff, and like we just started kind of like holding meetings. We also like kind of created our existence like under a larger umbrella organization, and later kind of separated, which I think actually might be a really good strategy for like students who are potentially starting a group. Is like, start as like a sub branch of another organization if it'll structurally allow you to do that so you kind of have resources without having to like just like create something out of nothing with no resources, if that makes sense. But anyways, so we just kind of started holding meetings and decided we were going to do a showcase, and it got enough kind of publicity and like word of mouth that I don't remember if we did end up inviting like CAPS and people to be in the audience, or if they just showed up or what. But at first we just did it, and then they were there, and then there was kind of like this moment of like, oh my goodness, like they're really talking about this stuff, like they're really doing this, and something we've got to like, what is happening? There's kind of like this a little bit of a freak out, I think, like a very controlled like administrator freak out, but and so I think that, and then those conversations just basically began by like sending a lot of emails and like to a lot of different administrators and being like, hey, like we're this student group, this is what we're doing, and we'd like to partner with you in this way, or we'd like to do what, whatever. And so it was just, kind of the unglamorous work of sending emails.
Did you end up finding one person in the administration to be your kind of champion, or was it they talked among themselves internally and then it kind of like was communicated that way?
So it was difficult at first to find a champion because a lot of what we did at the beginning was actually criticize the administration, and I think that can be the hard part. But I will so at the beginning, my first year, we did a lot. Like our counseling, our counseling center had a 6-month long wait list to be seen. Like it was wild. and let me just start by saying though that they've made leaps and bounds, and that has not been an issue since my first year. Is what they've improved every single year. But at the time, it was a 6-month long wait list, and there was a triage system, but then that creates this really weird thing where it's like, is my mental health problem then you start comparing whose struggle is more important and who is seen as more immediate. And then when you have people at least for me, depression really messed up my self-esteem. And so, then it got to this thing for me where I was well, I don't deserve, somebody else deserves to be seen more than I do. And so it creates all of these weird psychological things without even meaning to. It's just a logistical problem that causes so much fallout. So we did a lot of criticizing of that, and I think that they were not very happy about that. And then also we called out a lot of the people had really negative experiences with counselors. There wasn't a lot of diversity, there wasn't a lot of there were some kind of problematic people, so we called all of that out, and so that caused some animosity, but what it also caused was change. They also then improved and then hired a bunch of new people, and so that the wait list wouldn't get that long. And so it was really, I don't think we had a champion my first year, at least from I guess we did in our advisor, or the advisor of the umbrella organization we were under, really believed in us, but she was from the art and student center, or the kind of social justice part of campus, or part of campus life, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so, but as far as mental health resources, I don't think we had a champion that first year. Then when Emory administration started to, and by that I mean the counseling center started to kind of respond and improve, we stopped criticizing them to the same extent. And then it was a lot easier to find a champion. Yeah. So I think that sometimes you just have to and I was kind of lucky enough, I was a first year, and so I don't think that I took the brunt of that responsibility of kind of the, like the, animosity, if you will, but I think that sometimes you just have to do it. Like, I think you just have to go and be okay with potentially having some people that don't like you very much. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's advocacy.
Yeah.
It's not advocacy if you're not making somebody mad.
Right.
So I guess on the note of working with administrators and leadership in the school, you do a lot of mental health related work in other capacities. So you mind talking a little bit about the other roles that you've had where you've brought mental health advocacy as part of what you were doing?
Definitely, yeah. So I think the biggest one is like my kind of other big role on campus is I'm an RA and have been involved in Red Life since my sophomore year. And with that, so like I had some really interesting experiences as a first year, like when I was kind of outside of the Res Life system, where I felt like mental health wasn't handled very well. Like I had some friends, I was in a really bad place my freshman year. I had some friends who like contacted the RA, and then the way that it was handled was done like according to the system and according in all with good intentions. But I just noticed so many like ways that were insensitive, and I'd experienced like other first years, like, if you say that, if you call your RA, and this might have been a kind of extreme instance, but like if you call an RA and like, you're like somebody's self-harming and I think they have some kind of like weapon, like a knife or something, that becomes a security issue that then gets like put up to like EPD, Emory Police Department. So I had a friend who like the Emory Police showed up when she was, like had like a little razor, like, you know what I mean? Like was obviously being harmful to herself, but was not a threat to anybody in the building, So just things like that I just noticed weren't handled very sensitively. And then when I became we have sophomore advisors at Emory. It's similar to an RA, but different. Anyways, when I first started in Red Life and found out kind of the call-up system of how mental health crises were handled, it felt so weird to me. It was like I had to call the grad on call and then the campus life professional who then called the student intervention services. And it was like before I was an RA, all I did was call SIS. And it's like, why do we have to rope in all of these other people when if it's like a sexual assault instance, you just call, you skip those steps. And so why are they not handled with like the same sensitivity? So anyways, all that's to say, when I kind of got involved with Res Life, that was kind of one of the first things that I started bringing up and being like, hey, like, why are we not handling this in like a more sensitive way? But then also that, like, I see my role as an RA to be a little bit, like the work that I do with mental health is a little bit more kind of at the individual level, I think. Like, I think rather than like a systematic one, but I think that people underestimate the power of like asking someone like, are you actually okay? And like, especially as a first year student, because as a first year, like you don't have a support system, like, or you do, but it's so different and it's maybe far away, if it's at home, whatever. And so I try to be the person, like I want all of my residents to know that they have at least one person that they can tell the truth to, who will like be there for them without judgment, and like they don't need to be afraid to come and tell me like, what is actually happening in their lives. And I think that made all the difference for me. So yeah. And then that's kind of one of them.
They're very lucky to have you. I feel supported just hearing you say that. Beautiful. That's amazing. That's awesome. So I guess did any like formal policies change as a result of your work, or no? Okay.
No, they didn't. It's pretty difficult to really change like Red Life policies, and it's a little bit different. Like not everybody in Red Life has different passions, and so it's a little bit different. Like I think if like all the RAs came together and were like, this is a problem, then maybe something would change. But as it is, like it's not always like that.
Yeah. There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of serious issues that Res Life and schools are dealing with too, in addition to mental health specifically. So yeah, I think it can be hard to bring groups of people with such even if you all care about the things that other people are working on, bringing everybody together to focus on that. And I guess that kind of ties into your work as a social justice coordinator then, because you've also worked with folks who are working on all different sorts of like personal passion advocacy issues too.
Yeah. So the other thing I do is, so I'm part of what's called Volunteer Emory, and it's basically just Emory's like biggest hub, like student hub for like all things like social justice, like volunteer work. You know, we kind of try to be the umbrella or like the connecting organization in that sense, but then we also do like a lot of our own stuff. So anyways, my role in that was to be a social justice coordinator, and so basically what that meant is I just like worked with a team to organize a bunch of events that address different social justice issues, and we try to do one a month. And so for me, it was really important to frame mental health as a social justice issue, because I think sometimes we forget that it is one, you know, and so I wanted to address the issue of burnout, because I think that as an advocate or as anybody who works in social justice, at least for me, like, you have a lot of empathy and you just care a lot and you want things to get done, and it can be extremely frustrating when you see people suffering unnecessarily, when just, you know, if something would change, like maybe some of that could be alleviated. And so I wanted to, you know, make sure that people like kind of understand that it's okay to not be okay and to take a step back for you, like even when you're spending all your time fighting for other people. And that's kind of a delicate, or that's something that I think has to be addressed responsibly too, because, you know, I think that sometimes when you work in social justice, it can be easy to kind of feel like, well, you know, you think of like the oxygen mask example, and you're like, well, how can I like, you know, like I need to like take care of other people, like there's somebody like dying in front of, like metaphorically, right, like dying in front of me, and like I'm okay-ish, and so like I should sacrifice myself for this person, you know. And so I think that teaching people like the difference between like, you know, how, like, what is an emergency, what can be like passed off to another person, and like recognizing signs of like when you're not okay, when you're not good at recognizing those signs in yourself is really important. So that was kind of the work that I tried to do through that avenue.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, kind of like maybe just a different way of saying what you said. When you're looking at all of the horrible things that are happening too in the world that you're focused on, just like what you mentioned earlier about how they kind of tease apart different tiers of what they need to, or triage in mental health. I think when you work on social justice issues, there can be a lot of guilt too. You know, all of this horrible stuff is happening. Why should I take that? Why can't I just get it together? You know, if I'm not experiencing this, or if all of these people who I'm working with are, you know, experiencing things that I feel are much more painful than what I'm experiencing, like why do I deserve to take time for myself? I think that's a big thing among advocates too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I guess too, the other piece that we wanted to bring in, we talked a little bit earlier, is you've shifted your focus a little bit. I don't know how you do all this stuff, but you shifted your focus academically as well towards nursing, and are also bringing in some of this work there. So if you want to share about, maybe if you want to share at all about how you decided to shift in that direction, but also how you plan on bringing this work kind of with you wherever you go, because I think there's so many different places where people can go with their careers, with their lives, where mental health is really a part of everything too. So it doesn't just have to be mental health, traditional advocacy forever. How are you planning on incorporating this in your shifting interests career-wise?
Absolutely, yeah. So the really honest answer about why I chose to do nursing was I realized that I have to be on my feet talking to people all day, and I didn't want to do research. And so that was kind of why I chose nursing over like being a therapist, which was kind of the other thing that I was like considering doing. But anyways, like as far as like bringing mental health like into that, I think that, and we've talked a little bit about kind of like the medical model and like how like, you know, medicalizing mental illness, like it can be helpful. Sometimes it also like has major limitations that oftentimes aren't addressed because we see the medical model as like the end all be all, just like that's just how society works with science and medicine and all of that, in my experience. But anyways, so I think that as a nurse, like I'm considering, I think what I want to do is be a mental health nurse practitioner. And I think that there's a lot of power in being a medical professional, and recognizing that the medical model isn't everything. Like being a person who can prescribe, who like has the power and the ability to prescribe medication, and recognizing, and like my own experience, like medication has done wonders for me with depression and anxiety. But so has therapy, and I think therapy has probably been the most important thing. And so I think that there's a huge, it's a privilege to be able to like sit down and talk to people and kind of be trusted with their like medical health, and be able to express to them like, look, like I can and will do these things for you, but also like, there's a lot of power in art. There's a lot of power in finding community. There's a lot of power in going to therapy and all of those things. And yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, it just doesn't have, I think for almost every single person I've talked to, it was never just one thing. There's not, and there probably won't be one thing that we figure out that just makes everybody feel the way that they want to feel all the time.
Absolutely. And then I think that too, like, everybody has like mental health, and there's a lot more people struggling with their mental health, or even suffering from like mental illness than we realize. And I think that, as a person who like has a lot of experience with those things, like I think that, being able to recognize it in patients who are grieving, like when does grief like step over the line into, depression, or however you want to define that, and just being able to like recognize when people are suffering. I think there's power in that. I think you can be an advocate in any field just by paying attention to people and letting them know it's okay. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think too, it does bring in what you're talking about does bring in that dance between art and science, right? It's like, it's not just having the background of saying, okay, this is the medical things that I know, and like this is a framework that some people find useful, but not everybody finds useful, and it's certainly not comprehensive. And it includes a lot of stuff. And like, how do I support you in the dance or the song or whatever, of like bringing together all of the pieces and experimenting with how you can bring parts of your life together to make you feel well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, wow, we've covered a lot of different stuff. Thank you so much for all that you've shared, for all that you've done, and all that you're obviously going to do. And I think the one question that I've been closing interviews with is, what words of wisdom would you give students working on these issues, or what do you wish you had known, or what would you have told your younger self, like coming into school?
Yeah. I think my words of wisdom to like people who are like beginning kind of mental health advocacy work, or starting a project or a program, is don't be afraid to be the bad guy. Don't be afraid to respectfully disagree and to respectfully point out the problems in whatever institution you're a part of, because they exist everywhere. And and it takes humility on the part of the institution to be able to recognize that, and a lot of courage to change. And you can be the catalyst for that change and do a lot of good. The flip side of that is it's not your job to save everybody. It's okay if you start something and can't finish it because your mental health is taking a toll, or your grades, or whatever. Like, it's okay. It's not just you. And I think creating systems of multiple people who care about these things can be one of the most powerful things that you can do.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Yeah, definitely, again, the like dance with both sides of things. But thanks for sharing all of this. And for folks who are listening, thank you for listening. And you'll be able to find more information about Chloe and about Emory Dark Arts in the report that is coming out with these interviews. So thanks, y'all, for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.